We now move on to motion number 3 on retained EU law reform. I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister Mike Kane.
Good. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the draft Motor Vehicles Driving Licence Amendment Regulations number 2/2025, which was laid before the House on the 14th of March, be approved. These draft regulations aim to support the transition to zero-emission vehicles, to reduce the regulatory burden on business and to drive economic growth on our journey to becoming a clean energy superpower. Now, businesses and families are choosing to make the switch to cleaner, greener vehicles that are cheaper to run and reduce noise and air pollution on our streets. The UK was the largest electric car market in Europe in 2024, and so far this year, demand is up 42% according to industry figures. However, zero-emissions vehicles can be heavier than equivalent petrol and diesel vehicles because of the weight of their battery or powertrain. This can push them into higher driving licence category than their petrol or diesel equivalents. Regulations to partially solve this problem were passed in 2018, allowing Category B licence holders to drive alternatively fuelled vehicles weighing up to 4.25 tonnes if they fulfil additional requirements. These requirements include 5 hours of additional training from an accredited instructor, only driving for the purpose of transporting goods, and no ability to tow. However, with the rapid growth of zero-emission technology since 2018, the existing regulations represent an unnecessary barrier to switching to zero-emission vehicles. The cost of the training and of taking drivers off the road to complete the training can be prohibited and time-consuming for business. This instrument will therefore enable holders of a standard Category B licence to drive a fully electric or hydrogen-powered vehicle up to a maximum weight of 4.25 tonnes without these additional requirements. Existing Category B rules on ages and passenger numbers will apply. Category B licence holders can also usually drive minibuses weighing up to 3.5 tonnes, provided they fulfil some additional requirements, including that the driver must be over the age of 21. The SI applies the same additional requirements to zero-emission minibuses weighing up to 4.25 tonnes. These regulations would also allow zero-emission vehicles up to 4.25 tonnes to tow a trailer in line with rules currently in place for their petrol and diesel counterparts, provided that the total combined vehicle and trailer weight does not exceed 7 tonnes. It is of great importance that people with disabilities can access this driving licence flexibility in an equitable manner. To ensure that disabled people are not excluded from the benefits that this SI allows, an eligible zero-emission vehicle may weigh up to 5 tonnes if fitted with specialist equipment for the carriage of disabled passengers. This additional weight allowance also applies to minibuses. The fuel types in scope of these regulations. I'm happy to give way to the honourable member.
Okay,
I thank the Minister for giving way. Could he elaborate on the type of changes to vehicles that would be covered by the provision for additional weight for disabled users?
So this applies to electric vehicles, not to gas or to synthetically fuelled vehicles. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. The fuel types in scope of these regulations will now be zero-emission vehicles rather than alternatively fuelled. The only vehicles not covered by these regulations that were in scope of the old are gas-powered vehicles, of which the government estimates there are fewer than 30 on the roads today, and their technology does not require an additional weight allowance. A public consultation on these proposals was held in 2022, receiving 89 responses, largely in support of the changes, though some concerns were raised on safety. Following a detailed analysis, the government is confident that these regulations pose an extremely low risk to road safety. In total, across the years from 2020 to 2023, there were 9 collisions involving these vehicles, 6 of which were minor collisions. However, we will be closely monitoring incident data as it becomes available to protect the safety of all road users. In the unlikely event that a concerning trend emerges, swift action will be taken to protect the public. The Department will be publishing detailed safety guidance which we are working with industry to disseminate. In closing, these regulations are a common sense measure to equalise driving licence rules between zero-emission vehicles and their petrol and diesel counterparts. And I commend this statutory instrument to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper. Shadow Minister Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in beginning, can I draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Interests, in particular in relation to the use of synthetic fuel donated for my summer surgery tour last August. Unlike other pieces of parliamentary business I've recently been involved with, my concerns about this particular statutory instrument are narrow. This means, to the relief of members across the House, I have no doubt, my remarks will be brief. First of all, I've never had such a big cheer. First of all, I want to actually thank the government for bringing forward within this some sensible reforms which will decrease the regulatory burden and provide more flexibility to Category B licence holders. Many of those are sensible steps that were widely supported in responses to the consultation during the last Parliament. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is unfortunate that the government's so-called plan for change did not involve scrapping the limitations featured in this statutory instrument. While unsurprising, limiting the scope of eligible vehicles from alternatively fuelled vehicles to simply zero-emission vehicles is a mistake that cannot be ignored. As we transition to new technologies, we as a country must be less prescriptive. Too often, governments want to tell industry and innovators what to do. I am afraid that the restrictive nature of this measure will risk only hampering our attempts to reduce emissions as a country. Let me be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. My concerns today are not a judgment on whether the government is right or wrong in its suggestion that which types of vehicle will be most effective. Rather, limiting the scope to a smaller subset of non-petrol and diesel fuels is far too narrow.
I'm very grateful to Honourable. Does he share my concern that this could prove a serious detriment to the UK synthetic biology research community, where there is significant effort going into the creation, effectively, of engineered bugs that can turn renewable matters such as sugarcane into combustible fuel for internal combustion engines, and would therefore represent a completely renewable source of energy within a kind of circular economy that would be carbon neutral in its entire life cycle.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for that point. It's a point I've actually been making for many, many, many years, certainly on my time on the Transport Select Committee in the previous Parliament, and outside of this place as I've engaged with the classic car sector, as I've engaged with all parts of industry. My right honourable friend is right that there is a big innovative drive for renewable, sustainable fuels, if I can call them such, some of which derive from feedstocks, others derive from waste matter, which do work in the internal combustion engines that we already have, jet engines as well as motor vehicle engines. And there is also entirely man-made synthetic fuels that require no such feedstocks, that do not require food to be grown in order to be burnt. And there are innovators in this country on that, as well as all over the world. Zero Petroleum, just next door to my constituency, just over the Oxfordshire border at Bicester Heritage, for example, have developed a fuel that works in every jet engine, every internal combustion engine that we enjoy today. That is entirely man-made, literally out of air and water, the mixture of green hydrogen with atmospheric carbon capture. But of course the ZEV mandate and the approach the government is fundamentally taking in the statutory instrument we debate this afternoon rules that technology out of order, because of course there is still carbon at tailpipe. What the regulations ignore is that that carbon at tailpipe is the same volume of carbon that is then recaptured out of the atmosphere in order to make the next lot of fuel. So a whole system analysis in fact shows that technology to be carbon neutral. One volume of carbon in a perpetual circle, but the government, throughout every step it's taken, no matter how much ministers and government as a whole claim to be technologically neutral, the test at tailpipe and the test in this statutory instrument explicitly referring to zero-emission vehicles rather than alternatively fuelled vehicles does in fact pick a technological winner rather than letting our great innovators innovate. So,
thanks to the honourable gentleman for giving me. I was quite interested in hearing about his knowledge and experience of alternative fuels. But he perhaps understands this instrument better than I do. But I understood it was about weight of vehicles. And an alternative fuel going through an internal combustion engine doesn't really result in additional weight. So are any of the technologies being described going to result in additional weight and therefore fall foul of what's been proposed? Thank you.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He is right that this is fundamentally about weight. And certainly on the synthetics point that my right honourable friend drew me on a moment ago, which I rarely need asking twice the number of years I've spent talking about that. It is true that on a synthetic fuel there wouldn't be an addition of weight, but some alternatively fuelled systems, hydrogen for example, where the fuel tanks themselves have to be so much more robust. The hydrogen, certainly in a hydrogen combustion vehicle, of which there are currently very few. It's only really, to my understanding, JCB that have developed that technology for construction plant, but it could have an application in the future to road vehicles. That hydrogen runs at something like 700 bar in the fuel tank, so obviously you wouldn't put it, Madam Deputy Speaker, in a fuel tank in an existing car that simply couldn't take that pressure, and there would be weight implications to a system such as that. So when
my honourable friend, it's interesting sitting here sometimes in this chamber to hear colleagues' expertise in areas you didn't know they had. I wish to draw him to a slightly different subject, the one he was actually beginning to touch on, and it's this. Electric vehicles, of course, with batteries, tend to be far heavier on an equivalent vehicle to an internal combustion vehicle. So some of the vehicle combinations that the Minister was talking about, for example, a vehicle and a trailer not exceeding 7 tonnes GVW, would be different if that car or van was an electric vehicle and would therefore perhaps mitigate somebody wishing to change from an internal combustion vehicle to an electric vehicle.
My reasonable friend makes a very accurate point there in his contribution. I think in some ways this SI is seeking to address that actual point. However, he is right that when real people out there in the country are making choices over their vehicles, they will make very practical decisions, such as that which my right honourable friend has just outlined, rather than looking at some of the other things I think government from time to time wishes they were thinking about when making those choices. So to make some very rapid progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the consultation on this was conducted, 25% of respondents, which I accept is only a quarter, but 25% of respondents favoured retaining alternatively fuelled vehicles on the basis of the extra flexibility offered by the current alternative fuels definition, particularly for hard-to-transition use cases. While this is a small subset, we risk limiting the capability of industry and technology if we close down the possibility of innovation. There may be occasions where the advanced weight would be beneficial to those alternative fuels. However, without flexibility, we will not know the answer. Those 25% will have to maintain the status quo. However, we believe we must let the technology decide to ensure that those hard-to-use cases are not abandoned, not the government. For those who may not be aware, the government has already withdrawn this SI to correct a drafting error. All we are asking as the opposition is for them to do exactly the same, amend the error, bring back the changes and allow the reductions in regulation without the restrictions on alternative fuels. That is not only the right approach, but the fair one.
Mark Francois.
I rise to make one very brief point. These are the Motor Vehicles Driving Licences Regulations 1999. To get a driving licence, you have to pass a driving test. But I'm sure, like many right honourable and honourable members, I've had lots of complaints from constituents about the increasing wait times for driving tests. I've been in an extended correspondence with Miss Loveday Ryder, the Chief Executive of the DVSA, but some of those replies have been very unsatisfactory. Can the Minister go back to the Department and look at what we can do to speed up driving tests, particularly combating those bots that capture the tests and then sell them on for profit?
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. We are pleased this provision maintains the ability of those with Category B driving licences to drive zero-emission vehicles up to certain weight thresholds. As has been noted, this instrument also reduces the scope of eligible vehicles from alternatively fuelled to zero emission. Now, although alternatively fuelled vehicles produce less CO2 than petrol and diesel vehicles, they still do produce CO2. As these vehicles do not therefore meet the cross-party consensus that all new cars and vans should be zero emission by 2035, we therefore support this restriction to zero emission vehicles. However, we again remind the government that more needs to be done to ensure EV charging infrastructure is in place. It's no good for people to be able to drive electric vehicles if they are unable to charge them. In addition to improving our EV charging infrastructure, we're also supportive of other incentives, such as restoring the plug-in grant. However, at this point, we need convincing, not that we might not be convinced, but we need convincing that removing the 5 hours training requirement, also contained within this instrument, is a good idea. Incentives should not come at the cost of reduced safety. And if a 5-hour training requirement was thought necessary in 1999, I'd like the Minister to explain why it is no longer required. Thank you.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank honourable members for consideration of this order. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sure the Minister meant to say with leave of the House.
Do forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank honourable members for their consideration of this order, and I will respond briefly to the points raised. The honourable member opposite said he was brief, he got the cheer, and then he went on to his favourite subject for just a little while of synthetically fuelled cars. We know he has one. I think that was... I think Churchill famously said from this dispatch box that a fanatic is someone who can't change the mind and won't change the subject. But I'll say that gently. In answer to his question, I really am being gentle there. The intention of the SI is to support the transition to zero-emission vehicles, and this driving licence flexibility is therefore designed to account for additional weight of heavier batteries presented in fully electric vehicles and some implementations of hydrogen fuel cell technology. Vehicles powered by natural gas or biogas are not net zero, and I get what he's saying about the single life cycle of the carbon, but not subject here to the standard Category B licence requirements, meaning that they can be driven up to 3.5 tonnes. The government estimates that there are currently fewer than 30 of these vehicles currently upon the road. E-fuels and synthetic fuels, which I know are his his area of expertise and interest are not disadvantaged by the standard Category B requirements which apply to petrol and diesel vehicles, and therefore not included in this SI. On the point of other fuel types, as synthetic fuels, as I said, they're already treated no differently in the driving licence regulations to their petrol or diesel counterparts, and also do not require the additional weight to achieve payload parity. This instrument seeks only to bring zero emissions emission vehicles to the same parity, and that's what this does. To the member of Raleigh and Wickford, I am not sure about his issue on the driving licence. He's not in his seat at the moment, but I'll undertake to write to him to do that. And so in closing, this instrument, while technical in nature, represents a common sense step that supports industry to make the switch to zero emissions, to decarbonise our road transport, and as we make progress to net zero. It will cut transport costs for business, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and further accelerate our progress to becoming that clean energy superpower that we so hope to be. I trust that this House has found this debate informative and will join me in supporting this legislation. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this order to the House. Forgive me.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Gerald Jones and Keir Mather. The tellers for the noes, Ben Obsijekti and Jerome Mayhew. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 304. The noes to the left, 101.
The ayes to the right were 304. The noes to the left, 101. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.